Shalom, good evening. Welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Vayechi. Vayechi is chapter 47 in the book of Brashevitzky, the book of Genesis. Vayechi Yaakov. It tells us Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, which actually 17 is also the gematria of the word tov, which means good, which means he lived his best years, he lived in Egypt. But his time in Egypt was coming close to an end, and it wasn't just a time in Egypt. Rather, Yaakov felt like very soon he is going to pass on and move on to the next world. So he calls his son Yosef, he calls for him, and he says, listen, if I find favor in your eyes. Let's read it inside. The days of Israel's death drew near. And he called to his son Yosef and he said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh, that you will deal kindly and truthfully with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. Rather, let me lie with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their grave. And Yosef said, I will do as you say. Yaakov said, swear to me. And he swore to him, and Yisrael, that's Israel, Yaakov, prostrated himself at the head of the bed. So what happened here? He asked Yosef for a commitment. Now, let's just take into account that Yosef is referred to as Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the pious, the righteous one. So it's obvious that if Yosef makes a commitment, he intends to stand behind his words. He intends to keep that commitment. He intends to follow through. So why is it that Yaakov insists that he swear? And then what is this thing about Yaakov prostrating himself at the head of the bed? So we know the thing about swearing. And if I'm not mistaken, many of the commentaries speak of it, that swearing, making an oath, puts an extra measure of obligation, puts an extra measure, therefore, of assurance to Yaakov that this is going to be carried through. Meaning, Yaakov knew that Yosef has every intention to carry through, to deliver on his commitment. But Yaakov also knew and understood that he's going to encounter many obstacles, as he did later. And it's going to be quite difficult for him to actually carry through and actually make it materialize. And therefore, Yaakov insisted and he pressed that he swears, so he has that extra measure of energy, of strength, of commitment, of drive because of this oath. Then he goes and he prostrates himself down. Rashi comments something very interesting. Rashi quotes the Talmud that says, quote, the fox in his day, you bow to him. Which really is saying that in truth, who's the king? The lion is the king of the animals. However, there is that occasion, perhaps very rare, that the fox is in a rulership position. On that day, you don't bow to the lion, you bow to the fox. Perhaps even the lion is going to bow to the fox on that day. That's how Rashi explains it. What does this mean? Why is this necessary? Think about it. And a very basic, simple understanding of this means Yosef is the king. Yosef, who's the monarch of Egypt, so Yaakov is bowing to him. Well, that cannot be the case. And I'll prove it to you. Because if that's the case, Yaakov should have bowed to him when? 17 years ago. Yaakov has been in Egypt for 17 years. It says, right? He lived in Egypt, and I said it was the best years of his life. Furthermore, as soon as Yosef entered the room, Yosef's the king. He may be a fox compared to the lion, compared to Yaakov himself, who was the patriarch of this family, and not only this family, but all of Israel, our family. But still, he should have bowed to him right then and there as he entered. So it's obvious that this is not merely being done merely because he's the king, but there's something more to it. And as we call this class is the practical Parsha. So obviously it has a lesson, has a meaning that serves as a great lesson to us in our day-to-day life. The answer is, as explained by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and along the same thinking, the same lines as why he made him swear, why he made him take that oath, an elaborate oath. Yaakov knew that in order for Yosef to pull this through, in order for him to pull it off, he needs to have that firm, assertive determination. That which comes with being a king. How best to arm him with that than by bowing to him. Bowing to him says, even I, your father, whom you, according to halacha, according to Jewish law, are obligated to honor me whether you're king or not. Whether you're king or high priest or the chief rabbi, you have to honor me. But I am bowing to you now because I want to infuse you. I want to inundate you with that extra strength, that extra firm assertiveness that you need to make sure that this matter gets done. And that's what it means. The fox on his day, when he needs to be boosted, when he needs to be prepped up, when you need to put him on a pedestal, do so by bowing to him. So he feels like, I have this capacity now, and I have to carry through, I have to deliver whatever it is that I have to deliver, but this gives them the strength. And this really, in my mind, tells us the importance of encouragement. I'm not talking about giving somebody fake or false compliments, fake or false, ideas. Sometimes people say something to a child or even to an adult, which the child or the adult themselves know is not true. Okay? And maybe the part of us that doesn't care to be lied to will enjoy it, but the part, most of us, which is the honest part of us, will say that this is not true. They don't accept it. But when you find a quality in a person, when you find that point in the person that you can now illustrate, you can now bring out, you can now build up, you can pump it up, you can actually use it to give the person that energy that they need, to give them the boost of confidence that they need. Do it. Bow to them. Because that's going to help them. And ultimately even help you get to the point that everything, all matters, get resolved. Especially those matters that this person has to do. So when you see a quality in a child, of course, not to give him some kind of false pretense that there's some kind of genius or whatever it is, you're over-inflated, that's going to do no good to the child, and the same is with an adult. But when you give them encouragement, and you say to them, look, wow, you did this so well, look how much you can do, look how much you can accomplish, look what definitely you've succeeded with, that gives the person that necessary energy and necessary power to be able to do it again, to be able to really fulfill their capacity of ability, of potential. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. Another very powerful thing is the next verse. It says, after these events, which really doesn't tell us if it was right away or later, but it definitely was a while later, someone said to Yosef, now who's the someone? A messenger came, a messenger arrives to Yosef and says, Yosef, behold, your father is ill. So now, not only we know that the days of Yosef, of Yaakov are numbered, right? Israel's days are numbered, but now we actually see that Yaakov fell ill, and he's starting to feel weakness, and he's starting to fade away. First of all, why wasn't Yosef there all the time? Why does a messenger have to come to let Yosef know that his father is ill? Shouldn't Yosef have known this automatically? Shouldn't he have been there?
Well, Jacob didn't live He lived in the outskirts.
Why did he live nearby? And, moreover, another question. It's interesting that this is the very first time we've seen the Torah. This is the very first time we encounter in the entire Torah that someone should fall ill before their passing. We'll talk about these two things and the practical application. So the first point was that Yosef had to be told. It's interesting that some deduce from this that perhaps Yosef did not spend that much time, or he spent very little time in the presence of his father. You say, how can that be? What, he was so busy, he couldn't afford time for his father? It was actually calculated. It was actually intentional. Not because of lack of respect for his father or lack of affection, on the contrary, because of the extreme respect that he had for his father, he was so careful about the honor of his father that he tried his best to avoid almost any encounter of being in the presence of his father. Why so? So we actually know some actual, this is anecdotal fact, stories of some of the greatest Torah giants. And one example would be the famous Maharam of Rottenburg. That it is said that from the day that he rose to greatness, meaning from the day that he was appointed as this great rabbi, and he became famous as this tremendous scholar, he was one of the greatest leading halachic authorities, Torah giants of almost all time, or at least the last 1,000 years. He avoided being in the presence of his father. Why? Because he was so careful about the law of honor their father or mother that he wouldn't accept. He certainly wouldn't be comfortable with the fact that his father would give him honor. Imagine his own father standing up in his presence. And he couldn't bear that. On the other hand, he had to give honor to his father, but he knew his father wouldn't accept it. So what is he to do? So as hard and difficult as it was, he avoided being in the presence of his father. He avoided almost altogether. And perhaps that's what happened here. Yosef was so careful about the respect that one needs to give to their parent. And he knew that if he's in the presence of Yaakov, that even Yaakov, let alone the brothers, is going to show him that extra honor, extra respect, because he is the monarch, he is the king, he is the leader of Egypt, and he did provide for them to save their lives. That Yosef tried to avoid being there. And therefore, when his father fell ill, now there was no other time, there was no other window of opportunity when to see his father, he had to be actually told, hey, your father is sick. Your father's not well. This just gives us a glimpse into really how, to what extent one has to go to the honor of one's father and mother. Just to share with you a few quick anecdotal stories. I remember reading a story of somebody, an individual who happened to be in the Rebbe's mother's home. And she lived in New York, and the Rebbe would come visit her every day. And he happened to be there. And of course, as soon as the door opened up, the Rebbe even had a key, his own key, so he shouldn't have to cause his mother, knock on the door and cause her any discomfort, okay, or any effort for her to come and open the door. So he would come and let himself in. That way, she wouldn't have to even get up to open the door for him. And he would always prepare a cup of tea and spend some time with her, and then he would leave. And he noticed something. He was standing in the room, and he noticed that the way the Rebbe was walking out was in a very peculiar way, if I may. He didn't just walk out the room when he finished talking to his mother. He walked out, he straightened out the chair, he kind of walked around the table, and then he slipped out of the room. So when he left, when the Rebbe left, the Rebbe's mother said to this individual, he thinks that I didn't notice or that I don't know, but from the day of his bar mitzvah, I know that he was careful not to turn his back to me. So the way that Rebbe walked out was never to turn his back to his mother, which is considered disrespect. We try to do it when it comes to the Ark, to the Torah, but whoever heard of somebody not turning the back to their parent, you just walk out naturally. The Rebbe would walk out backwards. In order for it not to be so obvious, he would kind of walk around the table, straighten out the chair and kind of things, and kind of, slip out the room that way. That's one story. Another story I remember hearing was that during a public gathering, now if anybody knows the way the layout is in 770, in the Rebbe Shul, so you have the lower level is where the men are. The Rebbe would sit by the public gatherings, by the Fabringans, on a higher stage. Okay, on the south side of the room there was like this platform, and on that was a table, and then the Rebbe would sit there, and this way he can address the crowd. And higher up, the balcony, with a plexiglass, like a I would say like a darkened plexiglass, so it's not easy to see through, but if you're in a higher position, you can see through better. From the ground level, you really can't see the women. It was the women's gallery. And the story, at least the way I heard it was, that the Rebbe noticed once, I think it was on a Shabbat, the Rebbe was in the middle of talking to the crowd, and no one really noticed it, but those who paid attention could actually see it. The Rebbe would typically sit on a chair that had two handrests. And the Rebbe, as it is, didn't sit all the way into the chair. He would not slump into the chair. He would sit in the middle of the chair, okay? Which is a very uncomfortable position. I don't know the reason for it. I'm just telling you, sharing a fact, okay? In this case, he noticed his mother had come in to the public gathering to see her son, and she was standing. Now, it's obvious the Rebbe didn't want to stand up, because what happens if the Rebbe would stand up? The entire crowd would stand up, okay? So the Rebbe, however, would not sit. The mother was in the presence of his mother standing, watching him. So the Rebbe leaned both hands on the handrests and perched himself up. And this went on for more than an hour or two. Imagine the effort that it takes just to be, and I understand, if I'm not mistaken, that his mother did notice that. And I think that was the last time either she came or that she was visible to that way, because she understood to what lengths the Rebbe would go to honor her. So that's just, some stories that really illustrate this point, of that there were some that were really, really so careful. They went to these great lengths in order to really fulfill that mitzvah of honoring the father and mother. At least if we're not on that level, but at least to some degree, to take some notice from this, and to try to at least emulate them as that being the ultimate benchmark. So wherever we are, to always continuously lift ourselves up higher and higher in this special mitzvah. Now let's go to the general idea of Yaakov becoming ill. And the truth is that this is not only prevalent in the Jewish culture, but in fact, almost in the entire world. This was totally different. It says in the Midrash that Yaakov was the first one to fall ill before passing away. The way it used to be, a person, as healthy as they were, as strong as they were, as much as it seemed like they were in the prime of their life, but when their ticket was pulled up there, when their number was pulled, the person would sneeze, and the neshama, the person's soul, which is the energy of the body, would just come out of the nostrils, just like it came in. Remember, everything seems, fit, everything comes full circle. Hashem, it says, blew in the soul of man into her nostrils, and so too, that's where it came out from. There was no warning. It was a sudden thing. It was a sudden thing. You had no clue. You had no cue as to when this is going to happen. Yaakov was the first one. He prayed to Hashem that a person should, in the typical situation, a person should have some kind of advance warning, some kind of hint that they may be coming close to the end. So they have time to gather their children, they have time to advise the children, they have time to give the last will and testament. Thus, Yaakov is the first one. And this is a very interesting thing, because that really is the origin of why we say Gesundheit zu gesund bless you, whatever it is, and in the languages that we know, the cultures, and we have so many languages and cultures here in America, why we, and I'll explain in a moment, why we either bless somebody or pray for someone, and I'll elaborate in a moment, when they sneeze. Because typically, in the past, it was associated with the opposite of health, the opposite of life. And here we're telling the person we're either blessing them or praying for them, saying, this should be to your health, this should be for your continued life. And in fact it is, because today when you sneeze, it cleans up your sinuses, it helps you afterwards breathe better. Correct? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting even discussion. Listen to this. Is one allowed to say, bless you, or gesundheit, or zu gesund, or we say in Hebrew, labriut, which is to your health, on Shabbat? And it depends how you look at it. We know that Shabbat is not a day that you're allowed to make any personal prayers. Shabbat is not a day of worry. Shabbat is not a day when one should be concerned with even realistic problems. Unless, God forbid, it's a matter at hand. It's to save a life. That's a different story. But in terms of praying for one's needs, one is forbidden to pray for one's needs. And that explains why the Amidah, which all week is 90 blessings, on Shabbat it's only 7. Because all the middle inserts with the requesting for this, requesting for that, and asking for this, asking for that doesn't exist on Shabbat. Right? In fact, even when one makes what we call a Misha Berach, makes a prayer for the ill, for those who need a speedy recovery, at the Torah reading, it's not the same prayer that we say during the weekdays. During the weekdays you say, God, may you heal this person, may you bring them strength, may you bring them long life to all their limbs and to all their sinews and to all their, and may you be healthy. On Shabbat, all we say is, Shabbat hi milizok. Shabbat is a day where we're not supposed to cry out for our needs, and therefore the healing is very near to come. So we're implying that, yes, this person needs a healing, God, please bless them, but we're not elaborately and deliberately praying for, in detail, for what this person needs. So if you make the argument that saying labriut, saying gesundheit, is like a prayer, then salu in Spanish, then you wouldn't be allowed to do it on Shabbat because you're making a prayer for somebody's personal need. But if you say it's just a blessing, you don't have to give a blessing to somebody on Shabbat. On the contrary, you're making the person feel even better. You give them a blessing, give them a wish, right? You're almost like congratulating them. They're going to have good health. That's allowed. The actual determination is that it's really both. So it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to say, salu or gesundheit or whatever may be on Shabbat. Interestingly, I saw a discussion as to, okay, this is the reason why Jews do it. But why is it very common all over the world, even people who have no clue, who have never read the Bible and certainly never read the Midrash and have no idea of what I told you, what I shared with you. So how come it's so commonplace? And I saw a very interesting explanation. Some say actually that there was a time when, I don't know, about 1,000 and something years ago, when even in Europe, there was some kind of terrible epidemic, and literally the ear was so bad. So if you were breathing superficially, that was fine. But the moment you sneezed and everything cleared up, breathing on the ear, it was fatal. It was fatal. So when that passed, people realized how crucial and how important and how sometimes, God forbid, detrimental, in that case at least, sneezing can be, and that's where it evolved. That's where Kameh developed into, people praying or wishing each other well when one sneezes. But in any case, you see how everything has an origin in the Torah, how everything has an origin in the history of the Jewish people. This is not just the history, but this is this story, okay? This is the story of how we live our lives, not what happened back then. And it's interesting that in Aramaic, the Torah is called Oraita. Oraita, the previous Rabbi should have said that you can actually split the word into two, and what it spells out is Or, which means light, Yata, comes. gives. It continuously gives light. It shines light on every aspect of our life, and it gives us a clarity in how to live our lives, and enhances our experience in the life that we already have. So, Hashem should help that we should always be healthy, always have the opportunity to properly fulfill our commitments, and certainly to honor our parents for many, many, many long, happy years in good health and prosperity. Shalom.
Shalom.
And welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Vayechi.